The American Red Cross is sharing new information saying they will now be providing financial assistance to the people hit hardest by the Fox Cities tornado. Taylor Zebel tells us who can receive this extra financial help.
On Wednesday, the Red Cross is moving from immediate emergency assistance to long-term recovery efforts after last week's tornado and storms deeply affected those across the Fox Valley. The Red Cross will begin reaching out to individuals whose homes were destroyed or significantly damaged, providing instructions on how to open a case and determine eligibility for financial assistance. In order to be eligible, households need to meet 3 requirements. First, they have to prove they are in a confirmed disaster-impacted area. Second, the primary residence meets the damage assessment criteria. And lastly, the head of household has to provide proof of identity and residence.
This is the first time that something has hit this close to home for me. This area, as a part of being the executive director for the Northeast chapter, this is in my chapter, this is in my backyard. So it is especially devastating and really hits close to home.
The Red Cross has sheltered 165 people total overnight, and as of Wednesday, have 9 people using the shelter.
Every time we see this kind of thing happen, I am incredibly touched and overwhelmed by not only our community partners who step up, but the communities themselves and the neighbors and families and loved ones and people throughout.
Residents should expect to hear from the Red Cross through either a text message, email, or phone call. If you believe you are eligible and have not heard from them, you can call 1-800-RED-CROSS where they can assist you. Reporting in Menasha, Taylor Zebel, Action 2 News.